Good evening. I'm Councillor Donna Greenan, the Vice Chairman of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting of the committee. Before we commence proceedings, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm sounds, please remain seated, and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and any other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. I would also like to advise members that they should only address the meeting by way of their microphones and to remind them to turn their microphone off when they've finished speaking. So, item number 1, apologies for absence. We've received apologies for absence from the Chairman, Councillor Field, Councillor Titchener, and Mr. Dobbs, independent member. Are there any other apologies? No? Are there any substitute members?
Councillor English for Councillor Field.
Thank you. Item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent items this evening. Item 4, visiting members. There's one visiting member.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cox to observe, if I may. Thank you.
Item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members and officers? Item 6, disclosures of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? No. Item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I move that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. Is that agreed? Item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March 2025. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March 2025 be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Right. That's agreed. Item 9, minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May 2025. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May 2025 be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 10. Question and answer session for local residents. There are no questions from local residents this evening. Item 11, questions from members to the Chairman. There are no questions from members to the Chairman of this meeting this evening. That brings us on to item 12, the 2025-26 work programme on page 9. Do members have any comments on the committee work programme? Councillor Cooley.
I noted in the minutes previous meeting that the senior lawyer was going to look at raising the monitoring officer, etc., whether it might be possible on a case-by-case basis to make some information available. So could I just ask, please, in that work programme, that question is specifically answered? I'm assuming on the 29th of September, Code of Conduct Matters 6 months update.
Thank you, Councillor Cooling. Yes, we'll make sure that that's addressed in the report on the September meeting.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay. So is the committee work programme noted? Is that agreed? Yep, that's agreed. Okay, item 13, annual governance statement, 2024-2025. I call upon Angela Woodhouse, Director of Strategy, Insight and Governance, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the annual governance statement comes to you tonight, and you receive this annually. Sounds a bit obvious, sorry. It gives an assessment and assurance in respect of our governance arrangements. So the assessment is drawn together following a survey of our leadership team on how we meet the principles of good governance. We also interview each director and the chief executive to draw out examples of good practice and any areas we believe are needed for improvement. The statement is a review of the previous year, but it does have a look forward to the coming year in terms of future governance challenges. For example, we've included actions around local government reorganisation. Overall, we're satisfied we have effective governance systems in place. However, we have included actions to ensure our arrangements continuously improve, which include addressing areas with weak audit ratings. There is some need for additional training and development, and we will be updating our local code of corporate governance in light of the new addendum that has been published this year. Since publishing the report, I have an amendment that needs to be made. So safeguarding is no longer weak, and emergency planning has moved to strong in terms of previous audit reviews carried out last year. This will be covered by the Head of Audit Partnership on the next item, but I will need to amend pages 6 and 7 to reflect the change. This was added from a draft report, and Catherine now has an update on this, which will come later. So I'll just make sure it's as accurate and up to date as possible. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Cadker.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for picking up on the safeguarding. Obviously, I was going to ask a question about it, but there's a similar things on the agenda number 14 about safeguarding. So is that also the same thing on the agenda number 14, I believe? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Coonan.
I'm not certain whether the update covered this. Apologies if it did. Page 14, the assessment summary right at the top. In the detail that follows in a report, D, interventions for outcomes, is put at fair, not good, and transparency and accountability is put at good, not fair. So as long, I don't know if you covered that in the update, but that needs to be reconciled. Okay. And then a comment in para 2.5, 74 performance dashboards. Don't members suffer from snow blindness with all of that? I mean, that's an incredible number of performance dashboards.
Yeah, so as a council, we have an analytics and information management team, and part of their work has been creating dashboards, so performance systems on Power BI. Most of those dashboards are internal, so they're for team managers and others within the team to monitor performance and progress. I think there's 13 that are public facing, so you'll be able to see those on our website, and we've recently introduced last year one for our key corporate performance indicators. So we've got one that's public facing that shows everything that's going on against those. It's currently been updated for the new corporate strategy, but those 74 have been developed over the last 2-3 years. So it's been work that's been building as the team grow knowledge that things become quicker so we can get things online, but they're used by our managers.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Good job I didn't look for them on the web, because I thought I read somewhere that the 74 were available. Would it be possible to have a list the next time you report on something of the 74 and who is the audience, should I say? Could we have the list of the 74, please? And then para 2.6, I just ask, a new corporate risk register. I have read the detail. Why was that necessary?
So I believe you've got that on the agenda tonight as a later item, but we've developed a new corporate strategy. So as a council, we then follow with a new corporate risk register, and it was due an update anyway as well. Things have moved on, and a very comprehensive workshop was carried out. Each has done a brilliant job, so I'm sure she'll be prepared to speak on this later. Yeah.
Councillor Trubinski.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew, sorry, I missed the which area was weak, and you've now changed that.
So those areas were the audits from last year. So we tend to, well, in the annual governance statement, we'll identify those that are weak, and then we'll make sure you're updated on them. But however, one has moved, so safeguarding has moved from weak. So it's actually improved, which is good.
I was just, in such case, I was just looking at it, commercial property management was rated as weak as well. And has that been assessed in the latest ideas for the development of Maidstone House?
So I'll pick this up in the next agenda item, if that's okay. I'll note your question, but that will be covered off more in our next agenda item.
Are there any further questions on this item? Peter Cooney.
Page 32, the waste contract, collection contract. May I just get reassurance that the intellectual property rights, IPR, relating to routes, etc., 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 that the IPR resides with the borough, so that as and when a re-procurement takes place, there will not be an IPR issue and there'll be continuity in terms of route, etc., etc.
I'll pick that up and take that back to the director, but I know they did do an extensive lessons learned following that exercise. Yeah, I'll take that back and take it on board. Thank you.
Councillor English.
Speaking as the Cabinet Member for Environmental Services, which includes the waste contract, I can assure you that we are fully aware of what caused the majority of the issues with the waste contract. Not to put too fine a point on it, it was a case of asking people to deal with too steep a learning curve in too short a time, and that was the nub of the issue. If members of this committee would like a full explanation at some point, I'm sure we can provide one, but the nub of the issue was asking the staff to do too much in too short a time. And that was what happened. And subsequently, we have made the decision that when this procurement is done, we will not be repeating that same mistake of asking people to do 6 impossible things before breakfast.
Councillor Coolin.
IPR is a contractual issue, so my direct question is the IPR held by NBC within the current contract for waste services. I'm not criticising what went wrong. Any major change is going to have hiccups. Have we got IPR by contractual right at the next transition? Thank you.
We'll give you a formal response on that, but my understanding is yes.
Are there any further questions? Right. Okay. So we've got amendments to the safeguarding rating, and page 14, also an amendment. So I propose that the recommendation as stated with the amendments that we've discussed is moved. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Berg. Okay, I'll just take a pause here if anybody wants to leave the room. Oh, sorry, is that agreed for anybody leaves the room? Okay, moving on to item 14, the Internal Audit Report and Annual Audit Opinion 2024-2025 on page 45. I call upon Catherine Woodward, Head of Mid-Kent Audit Partnership, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the Internal Report and Annual Audit Opinion on pages 45 to 74 is probably the most important report that I will bring to this committee. It's the conclusion of all of our previous year's work. So the Accounts and Audits Regulations 2015 state that we must undertake audit work to evaluate the effectiveness of our risk management, control and governance, taking into account the public sector internal audit standards. The public sector internal audit standards state that my report should include an annual audit opinion, a summary of the work completed that supports that opinion, and the statement of conformance with the standards. So for those eagle-eyed amongst you, you will recall that we have moved to the global internal audit standards, but for last year's work, we were still following the public sector internal audit standards. So just hopefully to try and avoid any confusion. Last year's work, old standards, this year's work, new standards. So in previous reports, I've outlined the progress of delivery of our audit plan, and I provided updates in November and January. And I tried to give you the likelihood of the opinion that I would be delivering at that point. So I'm pleased to be able to present today a positive audit opinion to this committee. So I've changed the format of the report, and page 51 describes my annual audit opinion. So I'm just going to read a section from that to the committee so that we've got it for the minutes. In my opinion, that sound assurance can be placed upon the systems in place to ensure that adequate and effective management, control and governance processes exist to manage the achievement of the Council's objectives. So this opinion feeds into the annual governance statement, which was the previous audit item, and the annual governance statement will accompany the statement of accounts, which is audited by our external auditors. In my report, page 53 details the basis of the opinion and the work performed and how I have come to my conclusions, and also any additional sources of assurance that I have drawn upon to arrive at my opinion. The table on page 56 lists the audits and their assurance ratings, which is very positive, with predominantly sound and strong opinions. So you will notice there are 2 audits that were weak within this. That were in draft stage within this. One of them was safeguarding, which was weak, at the point that I wrote the report. Since we issued that draft report, we have met with our contractors who helped support us deliver the audit work, and also with the clients. And I'm pleased to be able to report that since we've met with them, we have been able to revise that assurance rating, and that assurance rating is now sound on that. There are still some actions that need to be resolved within the service, but in order for me to provide my opinion, I was not prepared to issue it with a weak assurance rating. We did some interim work in November, and the service have significantly improved upon that work that we did in November, and that's what we want to reflect in this report that we have here now. So the statutory function of safeguarding within a district council is about referrals, and that's the processes that have improved, and they're working to improve about how they refer those through to the county council, who deal predominantly with safeguarding. The other draft report was emergency planning that was sound, and a similar process since we issued the draft report. We have met with the clients to discuss the findings, and that has now been issued as a strong. So what was already a very positive picture across the council has actually improved and is even more positive than it was at the point that we did this report. So tables on page 57 actually provide a bit more detail about the individual audits. When I provide my next update, which will be in November, progress report, I will provide all of the narrative for both the safeguarding audit and the emergency planning audit. I'll just cover off the other weak audit report in here, commercial property management. So this was a weak audit. We have agreed all of the findings with the service. The issues around weakness in this area were around compliance. So we have 5 commercial buildings, and this was about compliance with energy, gas, electricity requirements. And what we identified within this audit is there were different managers all operating a slightly different system with how they did things. We have now worked with the service to develop an approach to making sure that we can consistently and at the appropriate times make sure that the compliances are addressed. And so we're working with the service on developing those. So also in my report, page 59 provides summary of actions that relate to previous year's audit work. So this also feeds into my annual audit opinion. Sorry, this is on page 58. What we've got here are the previous 3 years of audits that we've undertaken and all of the actions that were raised and their status of them. So I have provided a little bit of narrative in the report as to what those outstanding actions are. So you'll see there are still some from 2022-23. What I have got there are the estimated completion dates on those. There are 2 audits that are overdue from 23-24. However, they are both low risk actions. We have worked with the service to try and make sure that they're going to be resolved due to, this is in business rates team, due to some of the changes within the shared service arrangement. Some staffing responsibilities changed and these 2 low risk recommendations hadn't been transferred over to the new responsible person. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any at this stage.
Councillor Travinsky.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to repeat my specific question earlier on, with the building controls, have they been applied to the new plans for Maidstone House?
Thank you, Councillor Travinsky. I think you will have heard from what the head of audit has said, is that the issues around the audit of corporate property management were about ongoing compliance problems. So far as Maidstone House is concerned, that's not an issue there. I think the issue you may be alluding to is the fact that there is work needed at Maidstone House to be compliant in the future, but it wasn't the issue that this audit was addressing.
Yeah, I realise that. What I'm saying is that obviously these plans are going ahead for Maidstone House. So will this particular weak control become a strong control in that instance? And will the new Maidstone House be compliant properly with all of the requirements?
Absolutely, Councillor Rabinsky. I mean, the whole point about bringing our buildings up to a good standard is to make sure that we do have equipment, whether it's electrical, gas, whatever, that is compliant. And we do take the findings of the audit very seriously, and we want to ensure that our buildings do meet all the legal requirements. So absolutely, we'll take that on board in the course of our refurbishment work at Maidstone House.
Councillor English.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure about the connection between the 2 issues, but I think, to be honest, but this is a concern, regardless. I'm just curious as to whether we are satisfied, first of all, that remedial action is being taken in regard to this compliance, and B, whether there is any wider implications other than for electrical gas certification. I won't go into the details in what's a public meeting, but I'm aware of one site where it would appear that payments may have been made to a contractor who hadn't actually carried out work, and the council was not actually aware that the work had not in fact been carried out. This was not a gas or electricity work, it was a general repair to a building where it had been signed off as actually having been done, and it in fact had not. So I wonder whether there is a wider issue with contract maintenance rather than just with the gas and electricity compliance.
So, I mean, you'll notice in the audit above, which is residential property management, we haven't had a similar issue, which obviously we use a number of contractors in that area. And last year we did a contract management audit, which did identify a number of issues. But this was primarily around the corporate governance arrangements rather than specific contractor issues we have. When we audit individual departments and we look through things, we do obviously sample. I think one of the things that, you know, we can't 100% sample everything, which is what makes my job so frustrating quite often. From what the work we have conducted to date, I wouldn't say there is a systemic problem regarding contractors. That's my opinion.
I wouldn't like to suggest it was systemic, but I'm aware of a couple of there's certainly one definite example of one possible one. So I just wonder whether we should be aware that it might not just be our knowledge of these particular works that needs solidifying.
If you have any specific concerns or anything, please direct them my way. Please email me as the head of Mid-Kent Audit. I'm more than happy to investigate and to look and further those queries if you have any.
Councillor Barwick, did you still have a question?
More a curiosity, really. On Appendix 1, right at the top, animal licensing and the kennelling. Just wondered what animals need licensing apart from maybe exotic animals, because dogs don't. I'm more curious than anything.
So now you're digging into my brain. I believe there is licensing arrangements, particularly with breeding certain animals, horses, dogs, those kind of things, which I think covers off a lot of this, obviously, and the exotic animals. But it is obviously it's quite a large section. It's quite a shame that Angela Woodhouse has left us, because that's her remit, so she would have been able to answer that straight away. But if you want me to provide more information, I can.
Councillor Kadka.
Thank you, Chair. My observation or the concern around the page number is around the commercial property management, which been raised by Councillor English as well. So just a couple of the non-compliance you can see is quite concerning. I mean, there could be, they are non-compliance to the legal requirement as well. Not sure how we come to the as a week. And also the number is 8 is also a bit concerning. C2 looks like not been rectified. That's another, the things quite, the concerning. So all in all, I think how we done about the regional properties and how we left it with the commercial property, there's a quite, the significant amount of concern, you can say it. So my question is, how are we gonna rectify it coming days or in next time?
So the process that we have in place for monitoring these recommendations that have been made, we have a time frame that we agree with the service when we agree to these recommendations. So those 8 medium recommendations that we raised on the commercial property management, the head of service has agreed a time frame which we deem to be an acceptable time frame. Normally within 6 months is what we try to ensure for a medium recommendation. When I provide my progress reports, the table that you see on page 58, that includes the detail of all of the actions that are outstanding. With these week audit reports, I am more than happy to provide an additional bit of commentary to the audit committee, the Audit Governance and Standards Committee, on the implementation of those actions. They have been agreed by the service, so we can provide that additional commentary in my progress report, so you can see how those are progressing throughout the year.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if you could answer a question that probably reflects my lack of experience on the committee more than the report itself. Could you provide some context on where sound as an assurance rating sits in terms of previous reports over, say, the last 10 years? I don't know where we normally sit and whether strong is something that's achievable or whether it's more of an unknown that you won't be able to get to.
So as a head of internal audit, I am required to provide an opinion, and we're not actually given any guidance as to what that opinion needs to be. So what I've provided for you, the assurance ratings that we use internally, and there is a definition on page 73, which is the strong, sound, weak and poor, is what I have applied collectively across the whole. In previous years, terminology has included things like generally conforms, or adequate, or those kind of things. And I've got to be honest, I'm not a fan of either of those words of general or adequate, because I'm not sure that they necessarily reflect the organisations that we all recognise, which is why I've moved to using the terminology of sound, because I think it arrives at a slightly more positive connotation than some of those adequate or general words. What would it take to move to strong? You'll probably be aware, working with auditors, that we're not an easy bunch to please. However, it's all about what controls are in place, and for me to be able to ensure that internal controls are strong and risk management arrangements are strong and governance arrangements are strong. Collectively as an organisation, I wouldn't say that we are too far away, but given the number of recommendations we're making across the year, I would expect them to be significantly lower, and certainly at the lower rather than medium end of those. So that would be what would move that into a more positive position.
Councillor Coolin.
I absolutely share a comment about the 8 medium on commercial property management. A general inquiry, please. Page 56. I'm wondering which, by the way, internal audit, I think, is one of the very strong features of this borough. But I'm wondering, within this table, which of these categories would the following fit in? As you're aware, the borough is the owner and the developer of a number of sites. And there has to be a legal construct put in place to make that legitimate. So at what point, if any, and under what heading would internal audit look at the way that those conflicted positions are handled? Thank you.
So, as Mr. Green has just pointed out to me, possibly we're referring to Section 106 agreements particularly.
I don't know what I'm referring to, but there are memoranda of understandings between the borough as owner and the borough as planner. And it is, are we sure, and they have to be rigorously adhered to procedurally, otherwise the borough, I believe, could be legally at risk. So at what point will internal audit take a view on whether the procedures are being adhered to under the MOUs? Thank you.
So there are 2 specific audits that I can think of off the top of my head that may cover this off. So one is around subsidiary company governance, of which we looked at last year, and another one would be Section 106 agreements, which is an audit that we are doing this year. In terms of those arrangements, what I can do is I will take your question away and I will discuss with management as to where that would most appropriately sit. But I think there are certainly some things that we do cover, but just to make sure that that aspect is covered off to satisfy the committee's requirements.
Thank you very much indeed. A second point, and this brought a wry smile, page 57. I see that the legal services assessment, there's one major non-compliance. Could you give a flavour of that? And I think it's slightly ironic. But what is the major non-compliance under legal services assessment? Thank you.
Again, I will have to take that away because this audit was an audit that was conducted by Lexel, the Law Society. I do have the report, but I can provide you some additional information on there.
Final point, and by the way, these points are not to criticise internal audit. As I said earlier on, I think it is one of the strengths of this borough. On page 64, and this is back to, is it residential or commercial? Residential property management, is it? Yeah. Of the top part, it seems that one of the contractors, Claire Glow, did not include all the KPIs outlined in the contract. If these things are contractual, in essence, they're service levels. In my experience, service levels come associated with what I used to call service credits. If they're not met, there's in inverted commas, a degree of recompense, a degree of penalty. So presumably, under contract management, there must be a general search for whether KPIs, service levels are actually defined, and if they do not have associated recompense associated with them in the contract, then for the future, looking forward, all contracts for service should have, I'll call them penalties, for non-performance by the contractor. If I can ask you to take that on board when you're looking at contractual arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and that will be what one of the recommendations was within this audit specifically. And just going back to the comment I made earlier about the previous audit on contract management, that was one of the areas that was raised in that previous audit. It was about ensuring that contracts are designed appropriately moving forwards as well.
Councillor Sams.
Thank you. Obviously, as a new member of this committee, I might be in the same sort of boat of asking, but I'm pleased to hear that the safeguarding has gone from weak to sound. Are there actions that are going to bring that up to strong? And if so, what are they?
So the general process we have for doing audits within our audit universe, of which there are over 120 things within it that we try and cover off over a 5-year period. Any audit that is a high-risk audit or an audit that has previously had a weak rating, we will ensure that we audit it on a more frequent basis. What we don't do is we don't do an audit and then do it again in a year's time to see if it's improved straight away, because we just don't have the resources to do that. So what will happen with this audit is that it will probably be looked at in about 2 years' time, 2.5 years' time again, to see. We'll follow up on all of the actions to make sure that those recommendations that we have made are implemented, which should obviously bring it up to a higher standard in any way. And then we check it again in a couple of years' time to make sure that they are still operating at that standard. Okay.
Are there any further questions? No? Okay. So this report is from information only. So I move the 2 recommendations given on page 45. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Beck, thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. And we'll take a pause where anybody can leave the room. Okay, moving on to item 15, the annual risk report on page 75. I call upon Uchi Olufemi, Enterprise Risk and Resilience Manager, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So as part of our regular risk reporting process, we will prepare an annual report to this committee, which has oversight of our risk management framework. Quarterly, we also present reports to Cabinet and also to the PAC, Climate Transition, Corporate and Environmental Services, PAC. So the purpose of this annual risk report is to give assurance to the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee that Maidstone Borough Council has appropriate and effective arrangements in place so we can identify, evaluate and manage risks across all levels of the organisation. It's also intended to provide a transparent summary of the Council's current corporate and operational risk profile. Now, some of the report's highlights include top strategic risks, which we call our corporate risks. Earlier on this year, we had a corporate risk review and a refresh. You did ask earlier on, and part of the reasons for that was, one, it was due a review, hadn't been done in a while, and we also have a new corporate strategy. We wanted to ensure that the risks that we're carrying within our corporate risk register are relevant, and so that they reflect what we're doing, they reflect the current standards. So that process involved bringing together a cross-section of cabinet members, a wider leadership team. We had surveys carried out to get people's views, and we all came into this room to have a workshop to discuss emerging trends, challenges that are out there, and things that we thought and everyone thought were key to ensuring that we do put controls in place for our services to continue to run. And the report also includes some of the efforts and things that we have done to embed risk awareness and accountability across the services. After the corporate risk that we have done, we have now commenced an operational risk review. We're working with service heads and managers all across the council to also review those operational risks. One of the other things that we did within that workshop was to look at emerging risks and threats, which are things that are out there and potentially have not come to fruition yet or are not so close, but looking wider in terms of things that we should keep an eye on and what we could be preparing for in future. So that's a summary of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Trzebinski.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. Page 88, just above the chart, it says including Appendix A. This is a bit picky, but I don't think there is an Appendix A. I think it's 1.1, isn't it? The second thing was, I know it's defined later on, but it might be nice on page 86 to have the key of the colours next to the current risk profile, just on the right-hand side. I know it's defined later on in the document, but it's nice to have it there immediately when you look at that circular plan. And they're sort of housekeeping bits, really. But my main thought on this, when I looked at it, was that we're actually taking our cyber risk down from 25 to 16. And that concerns me a little bit in that cyber risk is one of those things that's almost ever evolving. So, as soon as you plug a hole, another hole appears because you've got people looking at it all the time. And I personally, I would say that although we've taken mitigating action, as I've seen from the action list, that we should still be having a higher rating on that cyber factor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yes, you're right. Apologies for that error. It wasn't Appendix A. It was changed later on to 1.1. Thank you for that. And in terms of defining the colours, that's noted. In future reports, we'll make sure we bring that up closer so it's easier to read. And in terms of the cyber, yes, I completely agree with you. Cyber is one of about the top risks globally, and there are a lot of challenges. However, what we do with this risk, even when we've identified them as really high, we put a lot of measures in place, and everything that all of our ICT team has put in place, both phishing, all the protective measures, our business continuity arrangements, the way we're preparing and always exercising in order to respond to these incidents, we strongly believe that, yes, that sort of reduces the weighting of this risk. If we didn't have those number of measures and mitigations that we've put in place, then yes, definitely it would remain high.
Any further questions?
Thank you, Chair. Just minor observations. I can't find the synchronize between the risk register and then emerging risk. For example, the economic challenges, which you have got a corporate register, but not necessarily on the emerging risk. surely, you know, some of the like a cyber attack you can see on the risk register, it does have the indirect or direct impact to economic challenges, but for some reason I can't see that on the emerging risk. The next very minor recommendation or my observation is why we do not see AI as an emerging risk under the 6. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the emerging risks, they are definitely the items that we're looking out for, things that have not necessarily sort of come materialized yet or are not so close. They are the far-fetched ones. Now, AI is definitely is captured under some of our existing risks within the risk registers. So part of the refresh that we did this year, the corporate risk were 17, and in reassessing them, it has now dropped to 12. In reassessing them, what we did was to merge some of those, and for some of them, we made operational risks. So it was, yes, we're not seeing the AI within the corporate risk, but it is an already existing risk which we're looking at, and it was on the corporate risk register last year, but has then been absorbed by other risks.
Councillor Cooley.
Thank you very much. This 17 down to 12, if I were unkind, I would say that the way it's presented comes across as window dressing. I do understand how it's got from 17 to 12 with consolidation, etc., but I would have thought we should have been far more open, saying none of the risks have disappeared. It's just that they're actually being presented in a slightly different way. But that is an aside. More substantive, page 87, where you've got these matrices. It's obviously my lack of understanding, but the bottom right-hand matrix, which is mitigated. In the unmitigated, there are no level 5 impacts. In the mitigated, there are 4. How can mitigation increase the impact of any risks? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So let me take your first question. So while, yes, some of them were, the corporate risks were sort of reframed and readjusted, some of them were actually reduced from corporate risks to operational risks. So it wasn't only a question of just merging them. One, for instance, which we had within the corporate risk last year was a failure of Maidstone House building, for instance. So in reassessing it, we did discover and find out, okay, it is an operational risk, which a head of service now owns. The corporate risks are owned and managed by the directors and chief exec, while the operational risks are looked after by heads of service and managers. So those are the sort of changes that we had. So in essence, that means it's kind of reduced in its...
You want me to come back on that? I've read it very carefully, but the point is the risks have not disappeared. They're in a different category or been consolidated, and therefore it's presentation. But please, I don't want to dwell any further on that. I do understand it, but I'm just saying it's unfortunate to have the bold statement 17 down to 12 without giving a bit of context that some are consolidated and some have gone to operational. But I rest on that. What about the bottom right-hand matrix, please?
Thank you. I take your points on that. So I believe just taking a look at this, it would be potentially some of the risks that were up there on 8 and red and on the level 4 within the red and black that had reduced to come up.
I'm very sorry, I'm just being totally stupid. I just don't understand how mitigation can actually raise some levels. But please, I've made my point. If you think that is correct presentation, then I'll remain silent. But I think it's very surprising that mitigation pops up some level 5s. Thank you.
Thank you for your observation. We'll take a closer look at this. Thank you.
All the mitigations, are they in position? So on page 88, we should now ignore the unmitigated risk column, and it's only the mitigated risk column that is applied. And if that is the case, I seem to remember reading the narrative behind the draft audit. I may be wrong here. I think the unmitigated risk column appears in the narrative, and if all the mitigations are in position and you believe this mitigated risk column, I'm assuming that Grant Thornton will at some point adopt your mitigated risk column. Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat your last sentence? I didn't quite catch the last.
My apologies, I didn't put it very clearly. I seem to remember in some of the other 350 odd pages, and I think it was in the narrative to the draft accounts, I may be wrong, this table was more or less replicated, but it only had the unmitigated risk column. So my question is, if all of the mitigations are now in place, if you were doing this again, you would only present the right-hand mitigated risk column against each of the corporate risks, and that would be the one that should be carried forward to the draft accounts. I may be getting it around my neck, and I apologise, Mark, if I am.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cooling. I think you're referring to the risk register that's shown in the narrative report that is attached to the statement of accounts, and that doesn't purport to present the whole picture, as you point out. It only shows the unmitigated risks, and it's there to just show that. The detail, as you can see, about mitigations is in here. So I take the point, maybe for completeness, we should have shown in the narrative report both unmitigated and mitigated risks, but you're right to point out the difference between the two.
Councillor Sands.
Thank you. Just on page 93, under rising temporary accommodation costs, the controls planned, the two smaller things, improve access to private rented sector and capital programme allows for the temporary accommodation units to be acquired this year. And then there's the council continues to work with Homes England to promote 5,000 homes in Heathlands Garden Community. It seems, the other two seem quite small, and it seems as though that's quite a large risk if that doesn't happen, because it seems as though all the eggs are in one basket there. So to me, that seems quite a large risk.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Sams. The risk owner for this is actually my fellow director, William Cornell, and clearly he's not here, but I think I can try and say what he would have said, which is that there are a number of things that we're doing to address homelessness and the rising cost of temporary accommodation, and the garden community is just one of those. We're not relying entirely on that, and in fact, as you know, that's still some way off. The things that we can do in the shorter term are acquisition of temporary accommodation on the market. We're buying a lot of properties, just second-hand properties, and that's reducing the cost of temporary accommodation. It means we can put people in our own accommodation at a much lower cost than if they're in nightly paid accommodation. So we're doing that. We're also, as you know, and it's not specifically mentioned here, we're building, we've got 90 units on site at the moment. We've got further developments at Maidstone East and the old Springfield Library. So those are all things that will happen, and hopefully will reduce the pressure on temporary accommodation before Heathlands eventually is developed. So yes, this is one of the controls, but it is only one of the ones that is addressing the risk.
Councillor Cooch.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if I could ask quite specifically about the events on the 1st of July, when the extreme heat caused the failure of the systems at Maidstone House, and I also chaired a quite warm committee meeting in here. Do you feel that those events were sufficiently planned for in the risk register, and has that impacted the risk register since it happened, and in which case does it fall under, or does it impact corporate risk number 4 around climate related impacts, or corporate risk number 8 on business continuity, or if those two, what the relationship is between those two and if they interact? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I think you're correct. It touches a bit on both, but largely I would say business continuity as well. So following that incident, as we always do, we have had a debrief exercise to pick up on the lessons that we've learned from them, discuss with all of the services involved in terms of what could we have done different and what are we going to do next. So we've picked up on all those things and also presented that report to CLT. And as a result of having those conversations, CLT has approved a certain number of actions, from exploring the option of purchasing a new air conditioning unit to put in additional people on standby. And what that exercise has also done for us is pick up on business continuity arrangements for all of the services across the council, where things that people might not have thought about before, or areas where they were not sufficiently planned for. We have reached out to all of the priority services again, and they're currently updating their business continuity plans, which we're going to save on Teams so that people have access to them. So some of the key challenges were ability to access some documents, which are things that are easily rectified in terms of saving them in locations like Teams and in the cloud, where OneDrive, where we can have access to them. But that exercise has been done. We've picked up on those lessons, and the lessons are being learned, and they've been learned from them. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Cruden.
A final question, please, on page 91. Cyber attack, etc., etc. Do you see any additional risks or dimensions of risks from the prevalence of working from home? Does that bring extra concerns, extra risks? And if so, how are they mitigated? Thank you.
Thank you. So potentially, yes. And these are some of the things that were explored by the ICT team years ago when we started to prepare to work from home. And IT is constantly, and some of those risks really, I think the major risk in terms of cyber is human failure, clicking on things, for instance, that people are not meant to do. So one thing that IT is doing constantly is training everyone. So there are training sessions and projects that are currently in place where staff are being trained. There are phishing campaigns that are going on, and those phishing campaigns tend to identify various ways that some of those risks could occur. We could get attacked externally, and showing, and when people, and the current one that we've done is where someone clicks on that link, they will get an automatic email back to actually go and carry out a training because they failed that test. So we're doing those, we're doing the exercises I mentioned earlier on, and then IT is constantly educating people. This year we had a Business Continuity Awareness Week, and part of that whole week was sharing case studies on things that have happened previously in other public sectors, the councils, and sharing how attacks have happened, how councils have succumbed to them, and what people can do differently. So definitely it is a risk. I'm not quite sure if it's much greater than being in the office. It is higher. How much higher, I can't really say. However, IT is treating and addressing all of those risks and concerns because we work together with IT and the Emergency Planning and Business Continuity Unit.
May I just ask a follow-on that, a detail? Working from home, the machines that are used, laptops or whatever, do they have the capability to accept flash drives? So there's no possibility in the home environment of introducing files into your borough network.
Thank you. No, IT has blocked all of those. So the way really it can come in is by clicking on a dodgy email. Yeah, so no one can put in external drives and it will work on their systems. Yeah.
Thank you, Jed. The final question for me. Page number 89. I do get it. Is we're getting the emerging risk from the horizon scanning was identified from the external threat. Just going to page number 90, number 7, the community skill and expertise. I believe it's not the threat. It's not the emerging threat. I believe it's already exists in the borough. That's challenging. We're already seeing it. And probably what we could link it is with the number 4 and number 6 with the global conflict and changing demography. Probably that could be the contributing factor for those rather than the one individual. So I would rather just put the recommendation to merge those because I don't believe it's an emerging risk for the borough for lacking those skills. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. You make a very good point. Yes, it can be included, and to the existing risk that you mentioned, and potentially also looking at other impacts that there might be to them. But thank you. It's noted.
Are there any further questions? Sorry, Councillor Fulk.
Does the council have cyber insurance?
So yes, cyber insurance is something that we've been exploring for a very long time. It's been a bit tricky to do because it's been hugely expensive. But currently we are working with the finance team, IT, and talking to a number of insurance providers who have quoted, and we're in the process of trying to finalize and actually determine how we can purchase cyber insurance for the 3 councils that share the ICT service. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Quickly, yeah, just to say, yeah, the cost in the past has been prohibitive, so it's been hundreds of thousands of pounds, where actually you're often better spending that on your own, getting that real expert if sadly the incident happens, or preparing for it. The prices now come down substantially, so we're getting into that detailed conversation of they're double checking what controls and all the sort of bits that they want to make sure they can, you know, that the insurance will be valid. So we're going through that detailed conversation at the moment. So hopefully we'll have some insurance subject to both sides agreeing.
Could you join forces with like Swale and like you do with Mid-Kent?
So that's part of the tricky conversation at the moment. So at the moment, obviously MKS is, in terms of the IT services, part of Maidstone, although it provides it for the 2 other councils. We just need to make sure as part of that agreement, because they cover all of it, that the insurance can cover all 3, and we obviously just got to agree between who pays for it. So it's just part of that discussion we're having at the moment. But yeah, that's what our hope is. It will cover all of it, because it's the same controls, the same process.
Are there any further questions? No? I have one question. The risk regarding rising temporary accommodation costs, one of the controls is improve access to private rented sector. I just wondered how that was being done.
Again, I'm not the expert on this, but what we do try to do is to point people who come forward as homeless to the private rented sector and develop relationships with private sector landlords. But I can get a more detailed answer from William Cornell on that.
Okay, so this report was for information only. So I'm subject to the points that have been raised. Have you written them down? Okay, so hopefully all the points raised noted. So I move that the report makes the following recommendations to the committee: that the annual risk report attached as Appendix 1, risk framework, and the outputs from the recent risk workshop noted. Is that seconded? Councillor Burke and Councillor Cooch, if I take it. Is that agreed? Okay. Okay, anybody who'd like to leave, may leave. Moving on to item 16, the Treasury Management Annual Review 2024-25 on page 112. I call upon John Owen, Finance Manager, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance Prudential Code requires the Council to produce a mid-year annual report to members on its Treasury management activities. Treasury management function is also reported quarterly within the Council's budget monitoring reports. This report here outlines the Treasury management outturn for 24-25. The 24-25 Treasury Management Strategy was approved by Council on the 21st of February 2024, and the key elements were as follows. To utilise cash balances as far as possible rather than loan debt to finance capital programme in the short term due to high borrowing interest rates. Diversifying the current portfolio as much as possible to reduce counterparty risk. Keeping investments short term to meet demand of liabilities when they come due. Investment balances at the start of the year totalled £33.24 million. Balances had peaked during the year to £60.6 million, where funds were held in call accounts, money market funds and short-term deposits with local authorities. The Council held funds totalling 33.985 at the 31st of March 2025. A breakdown of these can be found in Appendix A. Investment income accrued during the year was 1.934 million, with an average rate of 5%. On the borrowing side, the Council had loans at the start of the financial year of £45 million. A further tranche of 20 million of the Aviva loans was received in February 2025, which gave an end-of-year balance of £65 million. No other borrowing was required during the year. The Council will receive the final tranche of the Aviva borrowing of £20 million next financial year in 2026. A full list of these borrowings could also be found in Appendix A. Along with the Treasury management activity for the year, the Council has to report on its prudential indicators, which show the final figures compared against the original estimates that were based at the start of the year. The authorised and operation borrowing limits have also been complied with and have not been breached. A list of these indicators can be found in Appendix B. I'd just also like to add on page 116, paragraph 2.3.2, it states the Council held investments totalling 33.985 million as at the 31st of March 2024. This should actually be 31st of March 2025. Okay, happy to take any questions from people. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Cooley?
Has the borough's track record on forecasting actual capital expenditure, i.e. massively undershooting it, has that had any adverse impacts on treasury management, I can think of one positive impact, because the Aviva loan is at a very advantageous rate, and therefore it hasn't all been used, and therefore we've got an investment surplus. But are there any downsides in actual monetary penalties, monetary impacts from the poor track record on CapEx management? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I don't think so. We work with John, Mark and I meet regularly with John to go through the treasury management, what the position is on capital and revenue spent. So if you think about the amount of cash coming through in terms of the amount of council tax and NNDR, actually capital to some degree, it obviously is a biggish number, but not that big overall compared to all the other cash coming in. So we regularly review that to make sure we make best use of the cash we've got and make those borrowing decisions which will maybe incur more costs or more interest. So yeah, we try and do that quite regularly to make sure we maximise the income and reduce the amount of borrowing we have to do.
Thank you very much. One detail, bottom of page 116, I think that should also be 31st of March 2025. That's a detail. The borough has investments with a number of local authorities and also in the private sector. In the private sector, you judge it on credit rating. How are you judging, because I don't understand it, which councils to put surplus monies into? And is it as rigorous as assessment of risk in the private sector? Thank you.
Local authorities are sort of deemed as very low risk because they have a statutory obligation to repay any debt back. But before we undertake any investments with local authorities, we do look at their financial statements. We also check there's no sort of like adverse publicity with them. Also that they haven't got a Section 114 notice, as certain local authorities have. So we do our due diligence around before investing with certain authorities, yes.
So if I heard that correctly, investment in other local authorities is not rock solid. And so how do you weigh up whether to put money into local authorities rather than the private sector with very detailed third-party assessment of risk? How do you weigh up how much to put into local authorities and how much to put in the private sector? Thank you.
As John has said, local authorities are a sound credit risk, but what we do, and this is reflected in the Treasury Management Strategy that is agreed by Council every year, we do have overall limits with individual counterparties, and we also, as you can see from the table in the appendix, we do try and spread our deposits, so we're not just investing with local authorities, we're investing in money markets and other accounts as well.
Councillor Cooch.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if I could follow up on a question that was actually raised by Councillor Greenan potentially at this point last year about what we know about whether our investments are ethical or not. I don't know if I missed a response to that, if it was just provided to Councillor Greenan or if something's been provided to this committee at any point.
Yeah, we do have a counterparty list which is provided to us by our Treasury advisors, which are MUFG. They are highly rated institutions, very ethical businesses and things like that. But if we have regular meetings, and if there's ever a counterparty that we feel not being ethical in the way that the council expects, we would look to restrict them from our counterparty list. and if we got funds with them, we would sort of like look to see whether it's we should get the funding back, and whether there's any sort of penalties that are incurred because of that.
Thank you. So if I can just come back on that, I don't know if I'm asking too much detail, but are you able to assure me that none of these investments are in oil or arms, for example?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Councillor Coolin?
As an ex-oil man, I must just rise to that. Sure, I believe the worldwide move to go for so-called ethical investment is actually waning. Therefore, presumably, the duty of the borough is to look after residents' money, and when it's invested, to get the best return allied with risk that is possible. So I think I'm right in saying that so-called ethical investment is actually on the way out. I may be wrong.
Are there any further questions? Councillor English.
We shall see what happens when Mr. Trump is no longer in office and the wind has changed. We should be beware of, I think, constructing the policies of this council, in particular in treasury management, whether it's about ethical investment or not, on the possibly temporary fashions that might come and go when particularly loud people are making noises and threatening organisations. So, having said that, I do believe we do, in fact, have a responsibility to secure a good rate of return for the residents of this borough. But there are some lines. I don't think all of us in this room would agree on what an ethical investment is, but there are some lines that do need to be drawn. Some of us would disagree on where they are and what side of the equation some things fall, but there are always going to be some investments that are clearly not ethical, and we should be beware of investing in them, if only because things being completely unethical can be a business risk and can actually lead to a financial issue for the council if it fails to take on board that an ethical risk can become a political risk that can become a business risk, as some banks that were investing in South Africa found out and joined apartheid. So you could make a legitimate business case for saying that a council, even if it didn't care about apartheid, would have been unwise to invest perhaps as much money in banks with high exposure to apartheid South Africa, purely on hard-headed economic grounds. So we should be aware of, over-egging the pudding.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor English. Are there any further questions? No? Okay, so we have two things to do tonight for this item. So the review of the financial year 24 to be noted. So I move that this is noted. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Burke. Is that agreed? Okay, and then the second item, that no amendments to the current Treasury management procedures are necessary as a result of the review. I move this recommendation. Is that seconded? Councillor Barwick, thank you. And is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 17, draft annual accounts 2024-25. I call upon Adrian Lovegrove, Head of Finance, to introduce the report.
Good evening, everyone. So this is the update on the draft annual accounts. You sadly have the B team. Unfortunately, Paul Hollander, our real technical expert, is sadly not able to make today. His father recently passed away, so sadly has a funeral today. But Mark and myself will do our best to answer as many questions as we can once we've gone through the update on this. So these are the draft accounts for year ending 31st 25. We're obviously in the process of being audited. We have our GT colleagues here as well. They'll be giving an update on the progress on that and generally where we are with audit in the UK. It's generally good news. As you're all aware, we've had delays in the audit in the past. We are now back to speed, and we're looking like we're going to get these all audited by 30th of November, which is back within the formal timescale, which is great news from both sides. Obviously the draft accounts, so they've been to Mark for review, and Mark signed those off as the draft set, and they're obviously on the website available for use. Siggy, do you want to? Okay. And obviously the report is made up of a couple of things, which is the narrative report of the first few pages, which my view gives a simpler, hopefully a better view of not only the financial statements but about performance and where the council is, which I think is good for the public. And then you get into the more technical statement, which is where potentially it gets a lot more technical and covers some of the statutory requirements around reporting. The actual report itself covers the general things that you would expect to see in there in terms of an income and expenditure account, which is like a profit and loss. We do have to make some adjustments to reflect the international standards. So you won't necessarily see a figure that you might reflect as seeing as a surplus, but there are reconciliations that help to explain that. There are obviously details of the movement of reserves, so key things around what we have in terms of some of those amounts held back. It also covers things like the unusable reserves, so some of these around assets in terms of pensions, asset revaluations, and other capital transactions that are outside of our control, but obviously we report on those as part of that. So that gives you, I think, a good overview of those sort of initial income and expenditure bits. There's also a balance sheet, which covers the value of the assets, so things like the value of the properties and other items that in terms of where we've invested our money. And the sort of bits to finalise is the cash flow statement, so the ins and outs to reflect where we are. And then the last bit is about the collection fund. So as the authority that is the billing authority, so we collect all the council tax and then NDR for the rest of Kent. So that's where we bring all the cash in, and we manage to deal with that and obviously pay it back to government or the relevant authority. And that covers a lot of that for you. So I'm hoping that gives you a good picture of where we are in the statement. There's only been one sort of technical change, which all councils have to deal with in terms of IFRS 16, which deal with the operating and finance leases, where we've been asked to work through that and make sure we classify them against new legislation. That's a real quick run through of where we are, and I think I've got an early question.
Councillor Czerwinski.
Well, thanks for that, Adrian. Just a couple of presentations. These are basically the same figures we had the briefing on.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've covered in that briefing. I think I've covered most of the questions I had on the figures themselves, but it just strikes me. Going to page of the narrative report, the third page. So yeah, page 3. Yeah, page 3. I know what the first thing one of my residents is going to say is, it's got business rates generated, but where are the domestic rates? That's just a sort of presentation, because that's what most of the residents will be interested in. How much am I paying for, and what am I getting for it, so to speak? So that's a thought. And then also, the page 136 onwards, where you have all the different priorities and things. I was looking at this, you've got the arrows up and down. And to me, that kind of doesn't really compute much. All right, it's gone up, gone down, but it depends how much it's gone up and down by, really. That's what I'd be interested in, certainly. So if we look at the third one down, say, on page 136, we've got numbering and enforcement complaints received. Okay, 431 it says, but it's gone down. But has that gone? If that's gone down from 1,000, for example, then that's quite an interesting stat. If it's gone down from 432, then it's actually not. So I personally, I would prefer to see some comparable figures in there. So yeah, and I think all the other questions I raised at the briefing when I saw it. So that's me. Thank you very much.
So I'll take your point on the performance. I'll chat with Mark because we prepare the style and the format, so we'll see if there's anything we can do going forward. In terms of your question about business rates, domestic rates, I know there's a terminology thing, but the same thing. Just in terms of a bit of information, so if you look at page 143, that does give you an idea of the amount of business rates we get and how much we actually hand over to the government. So at the top row, we talk about 62.6 million of business rates. Hopefully you've got that page. And then we've got the next sort of row down is paid to others, 189 million. So 54 million of that business rates goes back to government. So I know there's the terminology issue, but at least gives you an idea of actually how much work and effort we do, but actually it's going back to government for others to use centrally.
Councillor Barwick.
Yeah, on the key facts about Maidstone, page 3, the weekly pay for full-time workers, I don't know many people that are on that sort of salary. It's sort of like the footballers type thing, because it works out at £18.70 an hour. And certainly in the ward that I represent, Shepway, you wouldn't get many people probably earning that. I mean, even if you take into consideration the minimum wage as it currently is, let alone what it was in 2024, that's over £200 a week that someone would earn on the minimum wage. So I just wondered where that figure had come from. Have we got a lot of millionaires that live in Maidstone then? Because, or is it based on the government, how the government works it out, and they include, you know, chief execs on millions of pounds, etc.
These are figures from national statistics, and I think probably it's the effect of averages. Clearly there are some wards in Maidstone that aren't as well off as others. Overall, the averages or the figures elsewhere in Maidstone are dragging the figures up. So yes, there are people earning a lot less than this, but these are the average figures as recorded by national statistics based on their surveys.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Cadker.
Thank you, Chair. Just a minor observation on the page number 141. Where you say the percentage of the repair completed within 21 days, target is 90%. We're only hitting 62.32%. Is that right? And these arrows, to be perfectly honest, this arrow is not quite actually the reader friendly, because if the target is 90, I know it's going down, but it should be actually flagging up. Other quite opposite is just below that one. Percentage of rent in arrears, target is 10%. So we got 2.8, which is, I would say, is good. Then status is not applicable. I don't know why there's no indicator on that. Thank you. I got the answer to it, yeah. So my question on the previous question about the percent of repair, 62.32% versus target 90%. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cadker. I can't talk about detail on these indicators, but what I would say is, first of all, on the residential properties, 62% isn't great, but that team has been working hard to get up to speed, and they now have a full-time manager who's dealing with housing repairs. So I would hope that in 25-26 we'd see an improvement in that area. We're taking on new properties all the time and gearing up in the management team. So far as the rent arrears are concerned, I imagine, but I would have to check, that the reason it's shown as not applicable in relation to last year is that we simply didn't have that as an indicator last year, so there isn't a comparison available.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Cooley.
Thank you. Page 124. This is about property, plant and equipment. Should we not be worried when valuers changed, a different valuer is brought on board? If there is such a substantial change as this, aren't all the valuers working to pretty closely defined regimens? So that's my first question. Aren't they working to standards across their valuation industry? Thank you.
They do, because they're obviously RICS qualified and try to work to similar standards, but they will use different assumptions for different types of property based on their experience, or the company may have a slightly different methodology. So we're just about to go through that with GT, because we know some of them have changed. So GT, I mean, we've obviously done some testing to go, why has it gone up, why has it gone down, to satisfy ourselves. GT will do something similar. They may come to a conclusion that they think they've got it wrong. I hope not, because they're the professionally qualified. So yeah, there's always a chance every so often that when you change value, they could change.
If I may, so the paragraph at the bottom of 124 is a bit worrying. So if this subjective valuation can be so volatile, why does it have, my ignorance, why does it have an impact on the actual cash that we need to borrow? Where is the linkage between this fiction of valuation and hard cash? Thank you.
So I don't worry about the change in valuation, because it's a valuation. It doesn't impact cash. So I'm sitting very comfortable going, okay, it's a slightly different value. The value on the balance sheet might go down, but actually it's a non-cash impacted. Cash impacted doesn't impact council tax. So from that perspective, I'm not concerned.
I may be the only one, but I am. It says here, the increase in PPE, etc., meant that the level of borrowing to fund the capital programme has increased this year. Why did it increase this year for a subjective valuation, which may be subjectively changed in another year? Why is it so volatile? Thank you.
So the increase in the property valuation, or the property value, is the purchases, and they are putting initially in the balance sheet at the price we buy them. That's the physical cash going out the door. So that's whatever you're paying at the market rate and so forth. The actual, what happens later on, as we do regularly, we'll revalue something. So they might go, well, that building is worth less or worth more, and that will be reflected in the balance sheet, but not cash impacting. So that's not impacting borrowing or anything else like that. It's cash neutral.
I'm sorry, why does it say, I am being difficult, that the level of borrowing to fund the capital programme has increased this year, full stop? Why did it say that? There must be a linkage somewhere. And if the valuation exercise was done, what does that do? Do you have to give some of the money back?
Maybe.
Oh, sorry.
There are two different things going on here. As has been explained, there is a change in the valuation of the property, but the particular bullet point that you're looking at is trying to explain the fact that the level of borrowing has gone up, and that is because, as has been explained, we've purchased more properties. So in total, PPE has gone up, and that's been to do with two things. One is additional properties being acquired, and secondly, changes in valuation. Two separate things impacting the number.
So I apologise for being stupid. Because these two bullets were next to each other, I just read through that this revaluation had an impact on level of borrowing. I'm wrong, but I'm sorry, it could be clearer.
Councillor English.
To be honest, I had to read it 3 times before I realised what it actually meant. So I don't think Councillor Cooling is particularly stupid or misread it slightly, because I had to read it several times. So perhaps it should have been worded rather more distinctly.
Thank you, Chair. I vaguely remember asking this at the briefing. I'm looking at the page 201. We've got the debtors and creditors. On the bad debts, the provision seems quite large, but do we have an aged analysis of those bad debts? And I mean, how far back do those aged debts go?
So yeah, do have an aged debt analysis. So some of the more regular debts, as usual, sort of 30, 60, 90, 120 days. If they are over a certain age and uncollectible, we'll come here, or not here, but for CTCS and then Cabinet for approval for write-off of those. So they happen on a quite regular basis. That's for ones over £12,000. Below £12,000, Mark has delegated authority to write those off. But they're transparent in the reporting for those over 12,000 because they need a recommendation to come through here.
Sorry, just off the top of your head, so how much do we actually write off each year, would you say, on average?
I wouldn't like to give a figure, but it's not high. It's the amount that come through the reports is fairly low. But I can do some analysis to let you know what those look like.
Okay, so if we're looking at this, am I right in saying we've got 41 million or so provision for bad debts? Page 201. That's the provision.
The allowance of bad debts that you can see on page 201 is 7996. Are you looking at that figure?
Yeah, but that's the figure that shows on the balance sheet.
Correct.
But that doesn't include a 40.7 provision. Am I right? Sorry.
So they are short-term debtors, but they will include things like the money we've lent out, or the money we've. Yes. So this will be to the local authorities. Will include some of the debt through the Treasury Management. So as minimal risk. If you'd like, I can get a breakdown of that to just give you some background, if that'll help.
If it's minimal risk, why have we taken provision for it? And it presumably because it's so old. So is it actually minimal risk?
Shall I try and answer the question again? You've got a total debtor figure of 48 million, and then if you take off the 8 million provision, you end up with the figure in the sentence at the bottom, which is 40 million. So it's certainly true to say that of the 48, there is an element, the 7996, which we may not be able to collect. So you may say that's a relatively high proportion, but we're taking a prudent view of the uncollectability of that, but it's still leaving 41 million, which is good debt.
What would those transactions be generally?
It's a whole lot of things. The other local authorities will generally be, because we're transacting with local authorities through the business rate system, that there'll be money in the pipeline that's due to us. Other entities and individuals will be a whole range of debtors arising from the services that we provide. So it's across all of the activities of the council.
Right. And so do we have a debt collection department, so to speak?
Yes, I mean, across the council, there's a whole lot of people who are involved in debt collection. In the Revenues and Benefits Service, there are teams that are responsible for collecting council tax and business rates. Generally, the collection is done at service level. There isn't a corporate debt collection team because it's more appropriate for the people who are familiar with that particular service and those particular debtors to do the chasing. But across the council, we clearly we give a high focus to debt collection. I mean, the ideal, and what I always encourage services to do, is to make sure that if the council's providing a service, then it aims to collect the cash up front, so we don't actually have a bad debt risk at all. But there's a whole lot of activities where we have to give credit to customers one way or another, where that's not possible.
Would it be possible to see, for example, the last 3 years of write-offs in a total for each year at some point? Maybe at the next meeting we could have a look at, just to check, make sure that we're not giving away too much money, so to speak. Well, thank you.
And just to give you some confidence in terms of those sort of short-term debts, they are short-term. And if you take the central government and local authorities, a bit like the conversation about the borrowing, it is pretty low risk. That they aren't going to go bankrupt as such, and they're going to be around. If you think about something like the refuge contract, so we pay all the bills and then we collect the money back from the other parties. So you only need 1 or 2 months to start going, well, actually, that's quite a big bill that you know you're going to get, but it just takes a little time for the money to come through.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Coonan.
So just checking, page 148, that is where it might be updated for the mitigated situation. Page 148. Yes. Second observation, page 199, the list of investments held, 3/4 are with unrated local authorities. So presumably you're very confident in local authorities you've chosen, but it's not quite as balanced as maybe I thought I heard earlier on, but I'm sure I'm wrong. But the main substantive point is page 215, and that's Peter Tishner isn't here. I've got to ask a pensions related one, haven't I? I noticed that the discount rate has gone up from 4.9% to 5.8%. Now, is that a real discount rate that's applied throughout the future cash flows of pension payments in and out? Is that a real rate? Thank you.
Yes, the discount rate is applied to the amount that, in theory, we're liable for future pensions from now to whenever the last of the current employees that we have passes away. So it's over a very long period, and arguably the accounting treatment which requires us to apply today's interest rate can be a bit misleading, and it leads, as you may remember from previous sets of accounts, to quite a lot of fluctuation in the liability that we have for pensions. If, as happened 3 or 4 years ago, the discount rate was right down at 1 or 2%, that made the liability look enormous. Now it's the other way around. We've got a relatively high discount rate, which has done wonders for our liability, but it's a bit misleading because, as you say, the actual period over which pensions will be paid is kind of like 20, 30, 40 years into the future.
So if I may be clear, it is a monetary rate of discount. It is not over and above inflation. It's a 5.9% is applied every year and the cash flow that it's being applied to is being inflated with whatever indices apply. It's a monetary discount rate, is that correct?
It's a market rate. It's the rate that applies at 31st of March 2025.
So that 0.9% increase is quite a difference. And when we get to the accounts and risks and so on, it strikes me that that is a sizable change, which when we get to discussing draft accounts, I will raise again, if I may. It looks like a substantial figure.
It is, but it's driven by the way that we're required to account for the pensions liability. All we do, or all the actuary does, is to take the market rate as at either 31st of March 24 or 31st of March 25. Over the past year, interest rates have gone up, hence the movement from 4.9% to 5.8%. So it's not something that we have any control over. The actuary, on our behalf, just calculates the figures using the rate of interest at the point in time that the accounts are drawn up.
Comment, if I may. It's volatile, and I'm very surprised that the regime that is supposed to be applied isn't taking a long-term view of the real discount rate, fluctuating inflation, real discount rate, which would be smoother. But if the rules are the rules, I think it's pretty unsatisfactory because it leads to a volatile situation. Thank you.
Councillor Barwick.
Thank you. Just to come back on my first point about the weekly pay, I can't find it. I can't find anything in the report that explains where that figure has come from, and I just wondered if something could be added, unless you can tell me where to find it.
A good point. We can put in references.
Are there any further questions, Councillor Spence?
Mark, this is how long's a piece of string question. Bearing in mind we're going towards the unitary system, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say that our financial situation as a borough, on average, compares to all the other councils in Kent? So, you know, where do we stand in on a 1 to 10? Just a gut feeling.
I won't give you a gut feel. I mean, what I would refer you to, though, is the accounts for the different authorities in Kent, and I'm sure you can do some ratios and work out who's got the strongest balance sheets amongst the authorities, but the information is all there in the public domain if you want to have a look at it.
Are there any further questions? No? Okay. That's what we do now. So, the recommendation is that the unaudited statement accounts 2024-25 are noted. I move this noted. Seconder. Councillor Trubinski, thank you. Is this agreed? Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 18, the External Auditor's Audit Plan and Update for 2024-2025. I call upon Mark Green, Director of Finance and Resources, to introduce the report funded by the representatives of Grant Thornton.
I'll actually hand straight over to Paul Dossett from Grant Thornton to introduce the audit plan and audit update.
Thank you, and good evening, councillors. I'm covering for Sophia Brown tonight as she's away. I'll just hand over to my colleague Sanya Malik, who's the audit manager, your new audit manager. She'll give you a brief summary of our report, and then we're happy to take questions.
Thank you, Paul. I've recently joined Grant Thornton as an audit manager, and I've worked in public sector audit for over 10 years and audited local government and NHS. I've received a detailed handover from our previous manager, Asad, since taking on the audit. I've been working closely with Adrian and the wider team to ensure smooth delivery and continuity. I will provide a quick overview on the progress of the audit. I will take the progress report as read by the committee members. The report outlines audit areas that were previously underway at the time this was drafted and have progressed since then. At this stage, there are no significant findings to report. We are on track to meet the September deadline and to issue the audit findings report and the auditor's annual report on time. I'd also like to acknowledge that the draft accounts were received on time and are of good quality. From a planning perspective, the planning stage of the audit is now completed. An indicative audit plan was shared in April, and no additional risks have emerged since then. I request the Chair to confirm that the audit plan is final, and I will now hand over to Paul to take us through the sector updates as well as the audit plan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the sector update really just identifies the key issues nationally that we pick up. Obviously, Grant Thornton covers 36% of all local authority audits, so we've picked up a series of issues. Obviously, development of the audit regime under the proposed local audit office. So I'm just happy to take any questions that members have got on that paper.
Okay, do we have any questions? No? Yes. Councillor Cruder.
I apologise if I didn't come to a briefing a few weeks ago. I wasn't able to do that. I've got a few observations or questions. I'm just going to register, as there's no longer a Councillor John Perry to raise materiality, I'm not going to drive into it, but I continually am amazed at what is now 2.3 million materiality for MBC. But let's move on. Where's the next one? Come back, John, and you can articulate it. I see on page 307, this is registered as a new value which may impact the methodology. Boy, have we had an impact. Excuse me, rambling, just going to go through them. One thing I've noted, and it's probably for Mark, but on page 311, right in the middle, payments to individual suppliers exceeding 40,000 are approved by bank signatories. How are the others approved?
Payments will always go through the system of first of all a purchase order being approved and then the payment being approved by the relevant officer, and we have a hierarchy of authorisations. The control that's referred to here is very much a backstop. All the invoices that go through the system have to be approved in the ordinary way by the relevant service manager, but as this says, just as a final check, I look at all payments over 40,000 and clear those for payment.
Very good, apologies. So it's approval, and then signatory as necessary over 40k. That's fine. On page 314, towards the bottom, all members and officers are required to complete an annual declaration. Has there been 100% compliance with that? From the bottom on page 314, all members and officers are required to complete an annual declaration of interest.
Yeah, we think we've had all the declarations of interest back, but we'll check. I mean, the auditors will be checking that as part of their work, I'm sure, anyway.
Thank you. And not many more, trust me. Right, then on page 319, accounting estimates, Appendix A accounting estimates, the second entry, investment property valuations. Has there been a change in accounting method in year? No. I'm just thinking aloud. It's subjective by valuer, but I mean that's for the professionals to sort out whether that no should be a yes. And I see the one below that is the defined benefit net pension fund liabilities valuation. Again, it's no. I understand that. Neither Clive, by the sound of it, nor I like the methodology, but you've applied the methodology with that substantial 0.9%. Yeah, fine. So that stays as a no. That's my lot. Sorry. Thank you.
Councillor Trubinski.
I'd just like to say thank you to Grant Thornton for a much improved service from previous years. And I think everything seems to be running smoothly. And also the information we're seeing about how the audit progresses each time is much, much better. So, yeah, thanks very much for that.
If I may add to that, I think that that is assisted by a more realistic fee being paid so that the staff can actually be attracted to keep the function going. But yes, I think, thank you.
Councillor English.
On the declaration of interest, I would suspect that the Borough Council's records are probably complete, where it may not be complete, and I'm not sure whether we have any remit in this or not, but I suspect there may be some parish council declarations of interest in the borough that have not been accurately filed. So I suspect that there may be some omissions there simply because there are so many of them and they change quite often. So I'm not entirely sure whether omissions in that area actually impact on our responsibility at all. But if we're trawling through, it might be wise to check those as well.
I would fully support that as Vice Chairman of Maidstone Calc.
Yes, it would no doubt be a good idea to check the parish council declarations of interest, but that's not within our scope. It's not something that we have to do for these accounts.
Sam.
Thank you. Page 309, what is the red text?
Sorry, what was the question?
What is the red text? Most of it's black and there's various people that are red.
If I'll answer that one. My colour blindness probably, so I don't know the text very well when I'm so nothing in particular. I suspect it's a new entry from London.
Okay, thank you. And also, what is the contracts of all the length of the contracts of all these consultants? They're obviously different lengths of contracts. And what's the risks of those if work is delayed and they have to continue to work?
So they'll all, you say, all vary. They will all go through a contract or procurement process. So depending on the value, they will do an assessment of, do a financial check, and as part of that, they'll check, make sure they're sustainable for that period. So we'll go through that process to check that, and that's all done through a procurement process. Procurement do the pricing and the other quality and some checks. Independently, then the person who's trying to get the service will do the actual quality of the service. So you try and keep them independent to make sure that it's double checked. So through that process, hopefully we get the right companies for the right length of period to provide that service. But you say they'll all vary in terms of depending on what, because some will be a particular project, so it'll only be 6 months. Some will be a longer project that could be quite a long time.
And obviously that's taken into consideration when there might be a budget for a particular consultant and then the work has not been done. So it's then that re-looked at.
Yes, so a lot of these, because they relate to the sort of property or the capital projects. So we plan that over multiple years. So as part of setting the budget, you agree a 5-year capital plan, and we obviously review that as progress is going through in terms of spend and whether we need to profile it slightly different across the years. If there's a total change in the spend on that capital programme, we'll obviously have to come back as appropriate if we're overspending and so forth, and we'll come back to the relevant PAC and Cabinet for approval to cope with that.
Are there any further questions? Okay. So, for this report, we've been asked to note the external auditor's audit plan for 2024-25 and to note the external auditor's audit update for 24-25. So, can I move that those two items are noted first of all? Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor English. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay. And the external auditor's planning inquiries attached in Appendix 3 be approved. Yep. Is that seconded? Councillor English, thank you. Is that agreed? Yep. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 19, the Budget Strategy Risk Assessment Update. I call upon Mark Green, Director of Finance Resources, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. This is the usual report that I bring to each meeting, setting out budget risks. And budget risks are a subset of the corporate risks that were discussed in a report earlier this evening. And the two things that I'd highlight in this meeting's report are a couple of really big issues and challenges that we face over the next couple of years. The first one is reform to local authority funding. This has been anticipated for some time, and a consultation was launched at the end of June on funding reform. It comes under the banner of fair funding. In practice, what that means is that there almost certainly will be a shift of resources away from particularly district councils like us, also some in the London boroughs, to authorities in the Midlands and the North. At this stage, we don't know exactly what that will mean in cash terms for Maidstone. So, in keeping with a practice we've followed for a number of years, we will be doing some scenario analysis to try and capture what is the best and the worst case that we can anticipate. We will know figures for funding from the government for certain, probably in late November or December, but to get an idea beforehand, we will be trying to do some scenarios on the basis of what we know so far. But that is a risk, particularly if the position is as bad as potentially it could be. And the other big area of risk, no news to you, I'm sure, is local government reorganisation. Here, I'm just really looking at it from the point of view of Maidstone Council itself for the next 2.5 years, if that's the remaining lifetime of the council. And the risk in that period, I think, is one of being distracted from the day-to-day business of the council, running services. Certainly all the messages that senior leadership, and I'm sure members too, have been putting out to staff is it shouldn't be a distraction. We should focus on continuing to deliver services as usual, but there is a risk that it will become more time-consuming and all-absorbing as we get closer to what's called vesting day, which on current plans looks as though it would be April 2028. So those are the two particular things I wanted to highlight, but you've got all the risks set out in the register here as usual. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Trubinski?
I think probably my only comment is just on the risk G. Inflation rate is higher than the 2% government target, and whether we've actually assessed that risk a bit low, because it looks like it's going to be like that for quite a while. It's going to be going up, and whether that should be, in fact, be a bit higher, that risk assessment.
Yes, and that's certainly something we'll be testing with our scenario analyses.
Thank you. Page 325, paragraph 213, please. Mark, may I ask, this subsidy, this necessary subsidy, you've estimated it's enough for 240 homes. Excuse my ignorance, I'm assuming that subsidy will be in perpetuity, every year. So I'm surprised, and I can't remember the accumulated subsidy fund at the moment. I'm surprised if it would cover 240 homes. I'm making this up for 30 years. So may I ask, what broad assumptions, if you can recollect them, it's an unfair question, have you assumed to say that you can handle 240 with the current subsidy funds? Thank you.
The assumption we make, and it is just an assumption, is that the subsidy is equivalent to 50,000 per home. So 240 units would mean setting aside 12 million. Actually, by the end of this year, we'll be up to about 15 million on current plans, but that's still short of where we need to be. And you're right, it's covering the whole of the life of the property. What we do is we capitalise the cost of that subsidy and pay it up front, so that it's not a burden for council taxpayers in the future. But that's the right thing to do if we're going to be providing social housing. So we're a good way towards having the subsidy for the whole of the 450 homes that are currently in the capital programme, but still some way to go.
So is that 50k for the life, whatever that means, of the particular home? Okay. And may I, sorry Mark, may I ask, you've presumably taken a view over 30 years, 20, 40 years, whatever, and you've discounted back. What sort of discount rate are you applying to get to what this fund needs to be?
I mean, the way that it's done is to look at the value of the home if it were for sale on the open market or for rent in the private sector versus its value as social housing. Now, at the point that we will transfer that housing into a housing revenue account, we will be getting a value. We'll use external valuers to establish what they consider to be the value, but you can see that there will be a difference in value between social housing, where the rental income is capped, versus private housing, and it's that gap between the two valuations that we estimate to be 50,000, but it's at the moment it is just an estimate.
So it sounds like a very fraught calculation, because social rent is susceptible to political influence, and then you've got the valuation of the property, which we've heard valuers make it up as they go along. I'm being facetious. So there are huge risks attaching to that 50k calculation. So are you conducting sort of sensitivity analyses, assuming it might be 100k? I mean, what is the borough doing to make sure that it can handle this risk on the 50k being perhaps dramatically out? Thank you.
It's a very good question, Councillor Cooling, and the comfort I think I would offer you is the fact that the council, in addition to the Housing Investment Fund, which is where we hold the 50,000 per unit for social housing, we do have general fund reserves, in total nearly 50 million as at the balance sheet date for these accounts. So we wouldn't want to have to dip into those reserves if the Housing Investment Fund wasn't sufficient, but that gives us a bit of leeway to deal with the kind of fluctuations that you indicate. I mean, it could go the other way, but there is a risk. You're right to highlight it.
I may pick up the question you put earlier about how would the finances of this borough rank in Kent or whatever. It strikes me with that level of reserves, general reserves, we are pretty darn resilient to an upward movement in that 50k. Is that a reasonable assumption?
I can never say for certain, but yes, we're reasonably well covered.
Question then. Paragraph 2.8, 258 million over the next 5 years, capital programme. And I'm assuming when it comes to setting up the revenue account, the revenue expenditure, that there has to be an assumption on funding that and therefore paying the interest on it. And so the interest comes into the revenue account. So given the past, well, as long as I can remember, 2 or 3 years where there's been massive underspend on the planned capital programme, are we now getting more realistic that the 258 will actually materialise over the next 5 years, and therefore it's quite right to put in that level of interest into the RevX account? Or are we kidding ourselves, and therefore you're having to find more and more savings in an unrealistic CapEx situation? Thank you.
I'd offer a number of reasons why I think the projections are now more accurate. We've clearly got the experience now of having delivered a sizable capital programme over the past few years. So Adrian and I and William Cornell and Phil Morris, who's responsible for the new housing programme, work closely together. So we can never be 100% confident, but I think got a greater degree of confidence in these numbers than we would have had maybe a couple of years ago. And the other thing I would say is that some of the blockers that previously existed to the capital programme proceeding have been removed now. So there is planning permission for Maidstone East and Springfield and the old Springfield Hospital site, and in fact we're out to tender on both sites now. So the programme is starting to move ahead.
A question, if I may, on 222. This is where you're absolutely correct to point out the potential costs of you having to not only do your day job, the borough to do its day job, but to plan for possible reorganisation. I say possible into unitaries. Have you got a separate budget account to keep track of all the resource, all the monetary expenditure going into this review of local authority organisation? Thank you.
Absolutely, we capture that separately. you may remember that Council in February this year agreed to set aside 100,000 for work on local government reorganisation. In practice, it may be more than that, but that was an initial amount that we set aside. But to go back to your main point, we are keeping a separate account of that expenditure.
Sams.
Thank you. Just on page 329, Appendix A, obviously the black top risk. So they're the things that aren't likely to happen. Is that correct? But obviously it would be the worst if it did happen. Yep. The capital programme J cannot be funded. So if, let's take that, we're talking about housing. If those houses, including things like Heathlands and the 5,000 houses, don't happen, surely that is a massive risk. And obviously the T, impact from Kent County Council financial challenges, that seems to be very high risk to me, even though it's in the black as though that's not going to happen. But I would say that's very high risk in terms of the local government's reorganisation, and if we're relying on Kent County Council to supply certain infrastructures like education, and they can't do that, then that's obviously, you know, a very high risk to us all.
That's absolutely right, Councillor Sams. I mean, the way that the chart works is that the vertical axis shows likelihood. So in fact, those black risks are quite high in terms of likelihood. And well, you'd expect me to agree because I put the report together that those are big risks for us, both on the delivery of the capital programme and on Kent County Council's financial position, because we know they had a 80 million budget gap that they had to close when setting a budget for this year, and that's meant that they've done a number of things. For example, they withdrew the subsidy that they provided for our council tax collection. There are a whole lot of things that they have done and could do in the future which would have an impact on district council budget. So that's the reason why we classify that as a high risk.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Barwick.
It's not a question, it's for information. If anyone wants to have a look at what KCC are proposing for local government and devolution, they had their first meeting today and all the paperwork is online, and you'll be able to watch all the woes and how much it's going to cost, and council tax is going up and we shouldn't be doing it, and this is forced on us by the government. So if you're interested, I listened to most of it.
Are there any further questions? No? Okay. So this report is for noting and the updated risk assessment. So I'd like to move that this goes ahead, and a seconder. Councillor Szybinski, thank you. And is this agreed? Yep. Okay. I want to thank everybody for their time and contributions this evening. It's been quite an interesting meeting, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.